We're going to start with Ryan Thayer, who is a community organizer and activist in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. He works with the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. So he's going to speak a bit about the work that he does to, increase food justice in the Tenderloin, and then we'll have another presentation and a break, and I think we'll have maybe just a couple small clarification questions after his presentation, but then you'll be able to ask more questions afterwards.
So thank you. So again, my name is Ryan Thayer. I have kind of two hats, mainly, at least in the context of this conversation. So one, I'm a community organizer with a low-income housing developer based in the Tenderloin, primarily looking at food justice issues, but also other equity issues that we face here in San Francisco right now. And then my other hat is as a co-coordinator of the Tenderloin Healthy Corner Store Coalition, which has been in existence about the same time I've been organizing with TNDC, and so I'll break those down kind of in two different efforts. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Tenderloin is in the central city of San Francisco, right by Civic Center, City Hall, right by Union Square, our main tourist area. It's the second most dense neighborhood in San Francisco next to Chinatown. It has, some of the lowest income inequality in the city, as a lot of Roberto's maps were pointing. Tenderloin has some of the highest concentrations of poverty, health disparities. There's a highest concentration of children in San Francisco. We have a lot of chronic health issues, substance abuse issues, crime, things like that. And so I was brought on in 2012 to expand our food justice programming, where access to food is a major issue in the neighborhood as well. The Tenderloin is the only neighborhood in San Francisco without access to a full-service grocery store. There's the highest concentration of many things, but also with corner stores. So there's over 70 in just roughly a square mile, about 40 blocks. Very high concentration of corner stores. And many of the units there are in SROs, so single resident occupancy hotels, which are single room, very small dwelling units, usually like 10 by 10 or smaller. Most of them do not have access to cooking facilities. They have shared kitchens, if that, and they have shared bathrooms, is usually like the common kind of landscape of what an SRO is. And many people have to get very inventive with their cooking facilities, right? So they'll have rice cookers and crock pots and microwave ovens and things like that. They're able to, usually not allowed to use burners. And so in 2010, community organizers with TNDC held what we call People's Summit, where we bring community members together to try to identify what issues that they're seeing faced in the neighborhood. Of that, food access became a major issue, and there was an idea to take over a vacant plot of land at Civic Center on Larkin and McAllister and start growing food. And so in 2010, we were able to work with some consulting groups and start up the Tenderloin People's Garden, which grows roughly 3,000 pounds of food each year, all that we give out free to people in the neighborhood at our bi-weekly harvest every 2 weeks. And that was really the start of our food justicing work, trying to engage residents in taking ownership of this parcel of land and growing their own food, getting connected to the local food system, to change behavior patterns, but then also to just increase access, since the overabundance of corner stores, fresh produce is lacking. And so I was brought on to expand our work into organizing rooftop gardens. So began working with residents in our buildings, extremely low income, supportive housing, senior housing, family housing, to start up growing food on the roof. And going through, for me, which is really important, is trying to go with a participatory planning process. So engaging people in the decision making, I think, is real essential, especially when looking at disadvantaged communities, that you're not just doing something for people and saying that this is what an issue is, right? Food access is an issue in the neighborhood. Here's a garden to help you with that. It's trying to actually engage them in that entire process, which is how the People's Garden formed and also how the rooftop gardens came to be. So they grow roughly 800 pounds or so, 1,000 pounds of food each year. That's also for residents in the neighborhood, in the buildings themselves. And so trying to not necessarily, provide a large amount of the food that they're going to consume. It's significant, but if you look in the Tenderloin, there's roughly 40,000 people. In San Francisco, it's about 800,000 people. Trying to grow 100% of people's food in the city is very limited. But it does have huge community benefits in making people aware of the importance of accessing fresh foods, being able to taste fresh foods, right, as opposed to the high processed foods that are in corner stores. And then also, there's a lot of substance abuse and mental health concerns in the Tenderloin, and being able to have people work in gardens and get their hands in the dirt and connect with plants has had huge mental health benefits. And so that was kind of the space where we came of growing our food justice work around urban ag. And I think, the education and the exposure to local food systems can't be stressed enough of how important that is, because as I think someone's question was around, like, how do these disparities exist and how do they begin in these low-income communities, and not having access to food and not being exposed to the importance of diet and nutrition, only being able to go to the corner store and grab, hot Cheetos and cream cheese, a lot of the kids like that, right, and having a Sprite, that the marketing kind of says, like, you go play basketball, drink a Sprite instead of water. Like, diets are developed over time, and so never being exposed to fresh foods, never being exposed to what a broccoli plant looks like, right, affects people's perception of what the foods that they're consuming. And I think urban ag, at least in our setting in the Tenderloin, being such a dense neighborhood, has really helped change that perspective. Additionally, through the Corner Store Coalition, which is a lot more of my efforts now, which also similarly came through a community process where a group of youth from the Vietnamese Youth Development Center went around and looked at the tobacco retailers in the Tenderloin. So the Tenderloin has an overabundance of tobacco retailers. I think there's something like 200 in District 6, where there's like 40 in the Marina District. I don't know the exact numbers, but there's crazy concentration. If you look at a map, you can't even see the actual map. It's just tobacco retailers everywhere. And so the youth went around and they did a short survey to kind of look at what the environment is. And they found that, one, there's a ridiculous amount of stores in the neighborhood, and two, that foods that are available there are low quality. You walk around and there's moldy tomatoes and rotting bananas and things like that. And so they held a community convening back in 2012 to display their results, the research that they've been doing. And that also was a way to get input from community members living in the neighborhood about what they would like to see happen, right? So we just showed you, or the youth just showed everybody, that there's a lot of these corner stores, there's a lot of low quality foods. The things that are there are priced higher than you can get at Safeway or at Foods Co. What should we do about it? And the overwhelming response was, let's turn these corner stores from something negative into something positive. And not really knowing what that's gonna look like, but also in the Tenderloin, there's a lot of loitering and people out on the street. There's a lot of drinking and substance abuse and things that are happening. And there's a negative perception of that behavior commonly, and it's associated with not feeling safe, right? And the perception of danger. And a lot of that is connected to corner stores and liquor stores. And so the community really, wanting to change that into something that's positive. And that was the forming of the Corner Store Coalition. And so we worked in a multiple different ways and going after grant funding and doing surveys, and we found, is access to food really a big issue, right? And is this something that, do people want to have access to the fresh produce? Is that going to be something that's actually a demand for in the neighborhood? Everybody knows that food access is an issue in the neighborhood, but are we really going to the residents, and do we really have support from that? And we found that people are spending about half their food budget outside the neighborhood each month, which is about $50 per household that we're estimating. That's leaving the neighborhood each month. That's almost $1 million. That's going to other neighborhoods, going to Safeway, going to Chinatown, going to Mission, so that people can purchase healthy food options. And so we're like, well, if we can bring some of that money back to these neighborhoods and to keep it in the community by working with store owners, working with small corner stores to change the way that they're marketing to the neighborhood, change the items that they're actually selling to the stores. We can support these small businesses and also help connect to some of those health disparities that Roberto was talking as well. Where, chronic disease and obesity and diabetes and things like that, can be directly connected to diet. And so we were able to bring on, now we have 7 resident food justice leaders who we pay an hourly wage that are longtime residents of the neighborhood, and they're the ones going out doing a lot of the legwork. So for the past 3 years, we've gone out and assessed 50 of the 70 stores. That's a model that we've taken from the Food Guardians who are operating out in Bayview, and look at, take a snapshot of the current healthy options that are being sold in the stores. And we found in the 3 years that there's been a shift up where more healthy food options are being sold, and a lot of that is happening from our store conversion processes. So we go in and we actually provide technical assistance and new equipment, so new shelving units, new refrigeration units, lighting, and then also community engagement, which having the peer education and the peer advocacy from the resident leaders is really essential, so that they can go out to their neighbors and to the place where they're living and engage people, and they're can say, did you know that this store is now selling fresh produce? You can actually go buy it here now. So we've done 4 stores where we'll go in and again give new refrigeration units, dry produce bins, adjustable metro shelving so that they can stock more items on the shelves. And we go into a contract with them that's called an individual development plan that shows that they're going to agree to the standards that we're trying to set, so that they're going to have a baseline of fruits and vegetables that they're selling. They're going to have work to decrease their shelf space available to alcohol and tobacco to 20% over a 3-year period. They're going to increase the shelf space available for healthy food items, fresh produce, and also healthy snack items, water, up to a minimum of 30% over this period, so that we can see this shift happening. We're not trying to go in and say, this is what needs to happen, you need to stop selling alcohol. You understand that's a big profit margin for a lot of these stores and small businesses. That's the way that they're staying available, but are being able to operate. But that they need to have the option to have more healthy options available in the store. And so that's been real successful in the 4 stores we've done. The Bayview also has another 4. There's one in the OMI, the Ocean View, Merced, Ingleside area of San Francisco, and that came about from a Healthy Retail SF program. So now it's institutionalized in the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and also the Department of Public Health as the city program that is now we're trying to work on expanding and growing. We track the point of sales data, so actually at the register, the sales that are happening in the store, and it's still pretty new since we've only converted our first store, I think 2 years ago, and we haven't really collected a lot of the POS data, so we're still getting on the trends of where the numbers are actually at. But we're finding that produce sales are jumping up dramatically, water sales are going up, the overall sales of the businesses are going up about 20%. We're seeing a decrease in alcohol and tobacco, and we're starting to see a decrease in sugary beverages as well. It's still a little bit too early to follow where the trends are at, but it's showing that it's working, right? And by providing more healthy food alternatives and opportunities to people in the neighborhood, they're actually consuming less of the negative, detrimental items that are being sold at these stores. And we're trying to grow this to a regional level, so we just recently held a regional convening in the Bay Area counties. We had about 80 people come from different community-based organizations and public health groups, and are trying to work out how can we build this on a regional level? How can we support more access to healthy foods in these low-income communities? How can we empower residents to be engaged and educated and trained on the importance of nutrition and nutrition education? And also, what I'm really excited about is looking at how can we use corner stores in low-income communities where we see the biggest disparities around access to healthy food options, where we find the highest concentrations of health concerns, into something more positive and connecting it to urban ag We're looking at like how can we have a local food system that produces food in low-income communities that is then available for purchase in low-income communities that also provides economic opportunities and job training programs, which we've luckily been able to do with our food justice leaders on a very small scale. But I think looking at a regional level, this is something that we can definitely expand out, and really want to think that looking at a local food system or a regional food system, and really stressing the importance of equity, right? And not just saying that having local foods and non-GMO foods and heirloom seeds is the importance, which is true, right? We need to definitely counter the way that the food system currently works and being controlled by large-scale corporations, but really looking at the equity piece and at the, at the basis, the people that are most impacted and are most, being harmed is our low-income communities, our communities of color, our poor communities. And so I think it's real important that we look at how can we connect a local food system to economic opportunities for people living in poverty, to give them these opportunities to change their interactions with the local food system, but also support putting money in their pocket, which is directly connected to some of the health disparities that we see. And so that's something that we're moving forward to, and something I'd really love to hear anybody's ideas on how that could actually work. We've done it on the neighborhood level, and how we can expand it out to the region and to the country. So thank you.
Thank you. No, we're not going to take questions right now, if that's okay. We're going to move on to the next presentation, and then we'll have maybe just a couple clarification questions, but not something that they would develop on, a short break. Then we'll have two other speakers, and then we'll have a big, not only Q&A, but a big conversation with all four of them who, on these questions that Ryan just asked. A big focus of this forum is addressing these sorts of issues, both of the consumer, but also the producer. As Chris explained, these are really connected, through the piece of what sort of model do we want to build from the ground up? What sort of agricultural model? And a lot of what we're talking about is urban ag. So Carolina is going to speak about the importance of land fundamentally in these conversations. And she's going to speak about the importance of land in the Zapatista struggle. So Carolina Dutton has spent a lot of time in Mexico. She lived there for 4 years in Chiapas, working as an educator in Zapatista communities. She goes back there regularly. She's stayed in touch with the communities that she worked with in the past on education programs. And she's also a very active member of the Chiapas Support Committee here in San Francisco.
So I'm wondering how many of you know very much about the Zapatistas? Oh, good. And has anybody here participated in either the first or second level, well, the first level or both levels of the Escuelitas Zapatistas? Yay. Okay, good. So I'm glad we have some background here. So I've actually didn't live in Chiapas for 4 years. I lived in Chiapas for maybe 1 year and maybe another year's worth of months. And I lived also in Morelos and Guerrero. So, and when I first went to Mexico, which was actually in the 70s, the thing that attracted me so much, besides the warmth of the culture, was the way people lived on the land in a very traditional way and still farmed. And this was in Guerrero, where I first went, in the mountains of Guerrero, sort of near Morelos. And Morelos is the state that Emiliano Zapata was from. And so the area that I spent a lot of time in, the people had ejidos and communal lands. And basically at that time in Mexico, after the revolution, after the Mexican Revolution, Zapata and his army of the South, their basic demand was land reform. And they did win it. And so that in the 70s, the 85% of the arable land of Mexico was in communal hands of people who were mostly indigenous people, campesinos, and it was not privately owned. It was either ejidos that people farmed, and it was he who works the land, gosh, now I don't even remember it. But anyway, the person who works the land is the one that can be there, and if you leave and go to the city, the land goes to somebody else to work. You can't just go renting it, although, you know, it's not that ideal, but it was wonderful the way people lived in that traditional way, although they certainly used a lot of pesticides. But, and that has changed. In 1992, Salinas de Gortari, with the pushing of the United States in preparation for NAFTA, reformed Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution. I mean, he pushed for the reform and went through Congress. And this article was what was won in the revolution. It was what granted this land. This land could never be bought or sold or used as collateral for loans. So that was changed. And so what was instituted instead, and this of course all came, anyway, this was all preparation for NAFTA, which was to take effect on the 1st of January 1994. And when Article 27 I was living there in 1992, and I didn't understand why people were not rebelling, why people were not protesting en masse, because I knew it would change everything. And it wasn't until 1994 when the Zapatistas rose up in Chiapas and took over 7 cities that, you know, they finally did. And the reason they didn't before was basically any campesino movements had been repressed. And people had to be underground if they were going to achieve anything. So what the Mexican government ended up doing was privatizing the land, which was giving the ejidos to individual families, mostly the men, in the men's name. And, you know, many people accepted that because they needed land. And here, if you had been farming, you had an ejido, and you could continue working as a campesino. But they had stopped previous to that giving any support for farmers. And so that when I was living there in 92, after this law got changed, people would come up to me in the streets of Tepoztlan, where I was living, and say, would you like to buy some land? Because they needed the money to work their land by selling a little portion of it. And so the Zapatistas refused to privatize land. In 94, they took over fincas. They took over what had been ranches and where they were working as practically slaves. And this land was, they call recuperated land. It is still in Zapatista hands. It was not just taken, there's both ranches, coffee plantations, sugar plantations, land that was basically for profit of, and they, now it is in their hands, but they will not privatize it. Also, the Zapatistas who live on ejidos won't accept getting that land in their name. They want that land as communal land, community land. And in order to be privatizing the land in that way, the community, a majority of the community has to basically vote that in an assembly that they're willing to do that. And so when the majority is Zapatista, that land doesn't get privatized. But the government is, of course, has offered the recuperated land to non-Zapatistas, saying you can have it if you come and take it away from the Zapatistas, which creates violence between indigenous people. And then they say, oh, they're always fighting with each other, but really, the government is creating a lot of this by offering things to non-Zapatistas. The Zapatistas refuse to take anything from the government. And I think I want to describe a little bit how they are doing things. I mean, they asked for autonomy. There was the San Andres Accords, which were signed by the government in 1996, as well as the Zapatistas, but the government never complied with them. And so they basically, after that, said, we are going to be autonomous anyway. And so one thing I'd kind of like to describe is where I was during the first Escuelita, which was near the Caracol of Morelia in a town called the 7th of January, the 7 de enero. And there, they had a collective for everything. They had a colectivo de caña. They made their own sugar. They made their own honey. They had to buy almost nothing. And they farm, and of course they have the milpa. And the families have their own milpa, their own fields where they grow their basic foods, which is mostly corn, squash, beans, and any other herbs that grow in the milpa. But they also have collective milpas, and this is true in most of the areas of Chiapas, that the families have their own land for for the sustenance of their family, as well as collective land that they're doing collective projects on, which helps to feed the education promoters, the health promoters, the insurgentes, and helps with any kind of projects the communities want to do. And their agriculture is organic. There may be some places that still use pesticides, but the whole push is to be organic, and there are agroecology. And one of the Zapatistas have autonomous education now also, and they do not train the students to work for the man. They train the students to work for their community, and you have a choice of becoming either a communications person that does radio, or and maybe they're branching off into other kinds of communications, but mostly it's been community radio so far, and computers, and or an education promoter, a health promoter, or an agroecology promoter. And so the agroecology promoters work with all the communities around ways to be organic in the milpa, in the coffee, in any kind of crops, and including with cattle, which they have in the selva. Although one thing, the Zapatistas are not perfect, and they certainly drink a lot of Coca-Cola. The collective stores, one of the things that they can actually make money selling is Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola really targeted indigenous communities in Mexico. And people got quite addicted to Coca-Cola, but it's very cheap there. Coca-Cola has its factories in San Cristobal, and it's really sucking out the water supply. But that's something they're working on. I mean, they've told me, yeah, we want to try to start making smoothies and not sell Coca-Cola, but they still are. There's something very interesting, which is the government gives handouts to people who have privatized the land, who have put the land in their own names, and the women get something called oportunidades, which is a handout every month. It's money that they can buy food or whatever with, if they send their kids to the regular schools, not the autonomous schools. And also, the men get something for farming. But what's actually happened is that what we heard talking with Zapatista communities is that those people don't work the land as much. They rely on these handouts, and they drink, and they use the money to drink, and they use the money to buy food from the Zapatistas, who are working very hard and are growing this really nutritious food. So actually the Zapatistas are being very successful with farming, both in terms of income as well as in terms of feeding themselves. And maybe that's all I will say for now.